The Land of Nowhere. Daniel and Susie had a pet between them. They loved it very much indeed. It was a pure white rabbit with big floppy ears and a lovely nose that twitched up and down. They called it Snowball, and every day they gave their rabbit fresh lettuce to eat and cleaned out its hutch. "He's the loveliest rabbit in the world," Daniel said, and Susie thought so too. The children had no other pets, just Snowball, so they loved the rabbit very much and played with him as often as they could. Then one day, a dreadful thing happened. They went to Snowball's hutch after breakfast, and the door was wide open. Daniel peeped into the hutch and looked all round. There was no rabbit there. "Susie," he cried, "what's happened? Snowball's gone. However could he have opened the door?" "He couldn't have," said Susie in astonishment. "I shut it myself yesterday evening and made it fast. I remember doing it." "Yes, I saw you," said Daniel. "Then how could Snowball have escaped?" "Somebody let him out," said Susie, nearly crying. "Oh, it's too bad. Let's look for him." So they looked for Snowball everywhere. They called him and hunted for him all over the garden. But he was gone. There wasn't a sign of him anywhere at all. Susie sat down in the grass and cried loudly. Daniel was very worried too. He did so love Snowball, and it was dreadful not to know where he was. Just suppose, someone had stolen him and meant to have him for dinner. It was too dreadful to think of. Daniel didn't dare to tell Susie what he thought, for he knew she would be very unhappy. Then a strange thing happened, and their adventures began. They heard a shrill whistling not far off, very high and strange. The children looked at one another. Where does that whistling come from?" asked Susie, drying her eyes. "It sounds as if it came from the greenhouse," said Daniel, puzzled. "But surely it can't, because there's no one there. Let's go and look." So they went. The door was open, and they went inside the hot, damp greenhouse. Bright geraniums glowed everywhere, and the maidenhair ferns hung cool and green. Certainly, the whistling came from the greenhouse. The children looked here and there to find what made the noise, and then they found it. It was made by a small man who was peeping out of a trap door under the staging on which the pots stood. He wore a bright green hat on his head, decorated with red cherries as small as peas. In his mouth was a silver whistle, and he was blowing this with all his might. "I say," said Daniel in surprise, staring at him. "Look, Susie! Who's that?" Susie looked, and she couldn't believe her eyes. The man was so tiny, only a little bigger than her biggest doll. As soon as the little man saw the children looking at him, he took the whistle out of his mouth and beamed at them. "I thought you'd hear me and come and find out what the noise was," he said. "Oh, Snowball, your rabbit, gave me a message for you." "Snowball gave you a message?" said Daniel, more surprised than ever. "Where is he?" "I'll tell you about it," said the little man, climbing out of the trapdoor and sitting down on an upturned pot nearby. "Last night, the Princess of Nowhere came by in her carriage. It was drawn by 4 black rabbits, and one of them stepped on a spray of bramble and hurt his foot in your garden. So the coachman hunted about for another rabbit to take his place, and of course he saw Snowball." "And did they take Snowball?" asked Susie, her eyes wide open in astonishment. "Yes, said the little man. He didn't want to go, because it's difficult to get back from the land of nowhere, and the Princess Juliana might want to keep him if he pulled her carriage well. So he was sad to have to go, and he called out a message to me as he went galloping off with the 3 black rabbits. He said, "Please tell Susie and Daniel where I'm going, and if I'm not back by the time 2 days and 2 nights have passed, ask them to come and fetch me." "Goodness me," cried Daniel, hardly able to believe such a strange tale. "Is it true? Has Snowball really gone to the land of nowhere? Where is it?" "I don't know," said the little man, shaking his head. "But if I were you, I'd wait till tomorrow night, and then if he isn't back by midnight, I should go and look for him, if you love him very much." "Oh, yes, we do love him very much," said Susie. "But suppose he doesn't come back? How can we find him?" "I'll help you all I can," said the little man. "If he's not back, come and rap on my trapdoor and I'll open it. Come just after midnight." "Oh, thank you," said the 2 children. "We will." The little man waved goodbye, climbed into the hole, and shut the trapdoor down. The children went out of the greenhouse, excited and puzzled. It was all so strange. They waited all that day and night, and all the next day for Snowball, but he didn't come back. They went to bed on the 2nd evening and kept awake till midnight. Then they crept downstairs to see if Snowball was back in his hutch. But he wasn't. "Well, we'll have to go and look for him," said Daniel. "Are you afraid, Susie?" "Not a bit," said Susie. "I love Snowball too much to be afraid. Besides, we'll be together, won't we?" "Well, come on. We'll go and rap on the trapdoor," said Daniel. The moon was shining brightly as they went into the greenhouse. Both children had quickly slipped on their clothes before they had gone down to the garden, just in case they might have to go and look for Snowball, so they were quite ready. The trapdoor was fast closed. Daniel could hardly see where it was. At last he found it and rapped on it. At first nothing happened, and then, when he rapped more loudly a 2nd time, it suddenly flew open, and the little man looked out. Hello, he said. "I was quite expecting you. So, Snowball hasn't come back?" "No," said Daniel. "And we're going to look for him and bring him back. You said you'd help us." "I can't help you much, I'm afraid," said the little man, "but I'll take you to someone who might be able to help you a lot. Come down through the trapdoor." "We can't," said Daniel. "We're too big." "Nonsense," said the little man with a laugh. "Try and see." Daniel put his foot through the trapdoor, and, goodness me, what a surprise! He suddenly grew as small as the little man, and found it was quite easy to squeeze through the trapdoor. He looked up at Susie. She seemed enormous, and she was gazing at him in the greatest astonishment. "Come on, Susie," called Daniel. "It's all right." So Susie put her foot into the trapdoor, and she too shot down as small as one of her dolls. She was so surprised. "The greenhouse looks enormous," she said, looking round. "I say, Daniel, isn't this an adventure?" "Come on," said the little man. "We haven't much time to spare. What's your names?" "Mine is Squiddle." "What a funny name," said Susie, laughing. "Mine's Susie, and this is Daniel." "What peculiar names," said Squiddle, laughing too. "I've never heard them before. But Squiddle is quite a common name in Fairyland." "Are you a fairy, then?" asked Daniel, excited. "Well, not exactly," said Squiddle. "I'm half a goblin and half a pixie." but I belong to the fairy folk and know them all. Come along, down this passage. Mind the step at the end. Along they all went, and soon came to a big door with a lamp hanging over it. On the door was a brass plate, on which a name was written. Mr. Spectacles. Mr. Spectacles, said Daniel, laughing. Another funny name. Squirrel knocked at the door, and it opened. A tall, thin man peered out, and Daniel and Susie saw why he had such a peculiar name. He wore 3 pairs of spectacles. One was at the end of his nose, one was on the bridge of his nose, and the third pair was upon his forehead. What do you want? Asked Mr. Spectacles in a gruff voice. Oh, Mr. Spectacles, could you help these 2 children? Asked Squirrel. They want to go to the land of nowhere, and they don't know where it is. You know so much, and you have so many clever books to tell you everything you want to know. Could you tell them which way to go? Come in and sit down, said Mr. Spectacles, smiling a sudden smile at the 2 shy children. I'll see what I can do. Daniel and Susie sat down in 2 big armchairs. Squirrel sat down on a stool. The children stared and stared at funny Mr. Spectacles and his 3 pairs of glasses. They longed to know why he wore so many pairs at once. I'll help you on one condition, said Mr. Spectacles, putting a 4th pair of spectacles onto his nose. And that is that you don't ask me why I wear so many pairs of spectacles. I'm so tired of answering that question. Daniel and Susie were very glad that they hadn't asked it. Oh, we shouldn't dream of asking you things you didn't want to tell us, said Daniel politely. But please, could you tell us where the land of nowhere is? Well, it might be anywhere, said Mr. Spectacles. Yes, it might be anywhere. Well, could you tell us where anywhere is, and we'll go and look there, said Susie. Yes, I'll tell you where anywhere is, said Mr. Spectacles, and he took down a great big atlas with many strange maps in it. He poked his finger here and there, and at last pointed to an island in the middle of a yellow sea. Anywhere is on the island at the moment, he said. There's a strange land, you know. It moves about from place to place. Well, nowhere might possibly be in the middle of anywhere, so I should advise you to look there. How can we get there? Asked Susie. Take the train to Golden Sands and catch the boat to the island of anywhere, said Mr. Spectacles, taking off the 4th pair of spectacles and polishing them with his handkerchief. But mind you catch that boat. There's only one that goes every week, and that's tomorrow. But can we travel all night? Asked Daniel. It's daytime in Fairyland, so you'll be all right, said Mr. Spectacles. Off you go now, and catch the train. Oh, thanks very much for not asking about my spectacles. I'll go with you, said Squirrel, taking the children by the hands. I'd like to help you. So Daniel and Susie and the little man in the green hat went out of the door and into the passage again. Squirrel hurried them up some steps, and they suddenly came to what looked like a tiny room with a seat in it. Squirrel pushed the children down on the seat and pulled a rope hanging nearby. Oh! Gasped the children. But the little room was a lift, and it shot up tremendously quickly, quite taking away their breaths. It rose up for about 3 minutes, and at last came to a stop on a very high hill. Get out, said Squirrel, and the lift's going down again. They walked out of the lift and watched it sink swiftly down into the hill out of sight. Then they looked round. What a long way they could see. The hill was very, very steep and as slippery as glass. Nobody could possibly climb up or down it. Just behind them, resting on the shoulders of the hill, was a long bank of cloud. It stayed quite still and didn't move at all, as clouds usually do. Where's the train?" asked Susie. "Surely there can't be a railway on this hill." It is a cloud railway," explained Squiddle. "You wait a minute, and you'll see the train. It's due very soon." Almost as he spoke, there came the rattle of wheels, and to the children's great delight, they saw the prettiest train imaginable, running along the bank of cloud just near them. It was the colour of the blue sky, and each carriage was in the shape of a bird. "How does it go?" asked Daniel. "Does it go by steam?" "No, by lightning," said Squiddle. "You'll see how quickly it goes when you're in it." They all climbed into a carriage that was shaped like a kingfisher. The engine driver, a goblin with a funny apple-like face, leant out to see that they were safely in, and then off they went, running along the clouds in the sky. The train went so very fast that both children clutched hold of the sides of the car and had to gasp for breath. Oh, goodness," said Daniel, when at last he could speak. "It certainly does go like lightning." It was a wonderful ride. It was bright daylight, just as Mr. Spectacles had said, and the children had a marvellous view of their world as they travelled swiftly along the clouds on the strange, airy railway. Then they came to Fairyland and saw the beautiful spires, towers and pinnacles of that dreamlike land. They wished the journey would never end as they travelled along the clouds that hung over Fairyland. "Oh, we shall catch the boat to anywhere," said Squiddle suddenly, looking anxiously at a very large red watch. "The train's not so fast as usual. There was a big storm last night, and some of the lightning got used up. So there's not so much for the train today." "Oh my, I hope we shall be in time," said Susie in dismay. "Mr. Spectacle said there was only one boat a week." On and on went the train, and at last the children cried out when they could see the sea. Then we're nearly there," said Squiddle, looking at his watch again. "Oh, I hope my watch is fast." The train came to a standstill on a cloud that rested on another very high hill. Out jumped Squiddle and the children and rushed to a lift that stood waiting. They got into it. Squiddle pulled the rope, and down they shot at such a speed that Susie really thought she was falling and cried out in fright. The lift stopped at the bottom, and the three of them ran out. They found themselves on a beach where the sand was as bright as gold. "This is golden sands," said Squiddle. "Oh dear, where's the boat?" "There it is," cried Daniel, pointing. "Oh, it's gone!" Sure enough, it had. It was far out to sea, a big boat with yellow sails. "Oh, we're too late," said Squiddle sadly. "We're too late. Oh, now what shall we do? Can you possibly wait a week? Well, then you could catch the next boat." "No, we couldn't possibly," said Daniel. "Why, our mother would worry terribly if we didn't go home." "Oh, we must rescue Snowball," said Susie, with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Squiddle, can't you think of something?" Squiddle shook his head. Susie began to cry properly, and Daniel and Squiddle took out their handkerchiefs and tried to comfort her. She wouldn't be comforted, and she made such a noise that Daniel was quite upset. "What's the matter with the little girl?" asked a surprised voice nearby. Daniel looked up and saw a mermaid sitting on a rock, her tail in a warm pool. "We missed the boat. I don't know how to get to anywhere," he said sadly. "Why don't you fly?" asked the mermaid, beginning to comb out her hair. "Mother Dibble has a fine lot of gull's wings to lend to people who miss the boat. She only charges a penny a time." "Where does Mother Dibble live?" asked Squirrel. "In that cave over there," said the mermaid, pointing. The children turned and saw a cave nearby with a little gate in front of it. "Oh, we'll go and get some wings then," said Squirrel gladly. He took the children's hands and they went over to the cave. Mother Dibble was sitting in it sewing. All around her hung beautiful wings, grey, white and black. "Good day, Mother Dibble," said Squirrel politely. "Would you lend us 3 pairs of gull's wings, please? We've missed the boat, and we want to get to the island of Anywhere at once. Here are 3 pennies for the wings." Mother Dibble took the pennies, and then chose 3 pairs of pearly grey wings. She fastened them carefully to their shoulders. The children felt most excited. They had often flown in dreams, but never in real life, and they could hardly wait until their wings were safely on. "Spread them out well and fly slowly," said Mother Dibble. They spread their wings and flapped them, and at once they rose up into the air. It was glorious. The children flew strongly over the water, and in a little while they had passed right over the ship they had missed. "We shall be there before the ship," cried Daniel. "Oh, look, Squirrel, is that the island of Anywhere?" "Yes," said Squirrel. "Isn't it strange?" It was indeed a strange island, but it changed its shape as they watched it. It seemed alive. In the centre of it was a shining town whose towers gleamed like gold. "Ah, that's the land of Nowhere," said Squirrel, pleased. "Mr. Spectacles said it might be anywhere, and so it is. It's in the middle of the island, so we're sure to find your rabbit Snowball there. Hooray!" They all flew down into the shining town. "We'd better go to the palace and ask for the stables," said Squirrel. So he stopped a hurrying gnome and asked the way to the palace of the Princess Juliana. Then on they went, their big gull's wings folded neatly behind them. They came to the glittering palace and walked a little way round it to where the stables were. Squirrel pushed open a door in the wall, and they passed through it into the stables. Rabbits were kept there, all jet black and beautiful. Their whiskers were carefully curled each morning, and their ears were brushed. The children couldn't see their white rabbit Snowball anywhere. They asked a servant where he was. "Oh, the Princess Juliana likes him so much that she's made him her pet," said the little servant. "He's sitting on a black velvet cushion by her knee in the palace." "Oh, goodness. Now we shall have to go and ask her for him," said Squirrel. "That may be awkward. Listen, children, if the princess is unkind and won't let Snowball go, wait for a signal from me. And then as soon as you see me wink hard at you, snatch up Snowball and run to the window. Fly out and up into the sky as quickly as you can. I'll stay behind to stop the princess from sending her flying gnomes after you." Feeling most excited, the children went with Squirrel to the palace gates. They went through them and made their way into the palace. They asked a servant to take them to the princess, and when at last they came to where she was sitting, they saw, to their great joy, their lovely rabbit Snowball sitting on a cushion at her feet, looking very bored and unhappy. "Oh, Sir Snowball!" cried Susie joyfully, and she ran to him and hugged him. "Oh, Your Highness, this is my darling bunny. You borrowed him the other night when one of your rabbits went lame, but now I've come to fetch him home again." The Princess Juliana was very beautiful and spoilt. She shook her curly golden head and looked cross. "He's my pet now," she said. "You can't have him. You should have a sack of gold instead." "No, I want my rabbit," said Susie firmly. The princess cried out crossly and ran to ring a big bell near the fireplace. "I will tell my servants to turn you out of the palace," she cried angrily. "You shan't have Snowball." Squirrel winked hard at Susie and Daniel. They knew it was a signal to act at once. So Daniel picked up the rabbit in his arms, and Susie ran to the window and opened it. In a second, the children spread out their wings and were up in the air. Squirrel was left behind to stop the princess from sending servants after them. Over the sea flew Daniel and Susie, leaving the strange land of nowhere, set in the island of anywhere, far behind. They wondered if Squirrel was all right, and then, to their great delight, they heard the swish-swish of big wings, and there he was, flying beside them once more. I couldn't stop the princess from sending out her flying gnomes," he cried breathlessly. "We mustn't stop at Golden Sands, for there's no train to take us away. We must fly straight on." Daniel and Susie looked behind and saw a whole crowd of little gnomes flying swiftly through the air after them. They flapped their gulls' wings all the faster, and soon the gnomes were left behind. On went the children, and on, Daniel carrying the frightened rabbit carefully in his arms, and Squirrel keeping a lookout for gnomes. Flying down to earth now," he said suddenly. So down they flew and landed in a garden. And whatever do you think? It was their very own garden, and there was the greenhouse just nearby. They had flown all the way home. As they dropped downwards, the daylight disappeared, and when they stood on the ground, everywhere was dark, save for faint shining moonlight. It became night time again as soon as they had left Fairyland behind. "Put Snowball into his hutch and get back to bed quickly," said Squirrel to the children. "You'll still be able to get a little sleep. Leave your gull's wings in the garden. They will fly back to Mother Dibble by themselves." Daniel put Snowball safely back into his hutch. Then the children said a loving good night to him, and you should have seen how his nose twitched with delight to be safely home again. Then they carefully took off their wings and put them on the grass. Just as they turned to go indoors, they heard a swishing sound, and, hey presto, the wings rose up by themselves and flew away. It was very strange. "Goodbye, goodbye," whispered Squirrel, pressing their hands. "I'm glad I was able to help you. Come and see me again sometimes." "Oh, we will," said the children. "Goodbye, and thank you so much." They crept into bed, surprised to find themselves their own size once more. "Whoa, what an adventure, Susie," said Daniel, as he put his head down on his pillow. "It's all mixed up in my mind. The Cross Princess, the Island of Anywhere, Mother Dibble and the Mermaid, the Cloud Railway, and that funny old Mr. Spectacles." "I wish we knew why he wore so many spectacles," sighed Susie. "That's just one thing I really would like to know." "I'd like to know too, wouldn't you? But I don't expect we shall ever find out."